A scream echoed through the silence of a pristine office building, but no one would ever hear it. In the CEO's private office, the body of a young intern was discovered, lying motionless on the floor. Blood smeared across the polished wood, stark contrast to the gleaming modern decor that had once symbolized success. What started as a secret love affair behind closed doors had turned deadly, and no one knew the dark truth behind it. She had been just an intern, eager to climb the corporate ladder when she caught the attention of one of the most powerful men in the company. But now, her lifeless body lay in the place where she had once worked, an office that was no longer a symbol of power, but a crime scene. The investigation would uncover a tangled web of passion, betrayal, and deceit. As the truth began to unravel, a shocking connection between the victim and the CEO came to light. What began as an illicit affair had escalated into something far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The real question was, who killed her and why? The answers would be darker than anyone had ever expected. It was a crisp autumn morning when the first signs of something amiss surfaced at Apex Technologies, a multi-million-dollar tech company known for its sleek offices and ruthless corporate culture. The company, nestled in the heart of the city, was a symbol of innovation and success, drawing top talent from across the globe. On the surface, everything seemed flawless until a tragic discovery shattered the illusion. The victim was Maeve Jensen, a bright, ambitious 24-year-old intern who had been working at Apex for just 6 months. Maeve had always been eager to prove herself, climbing quickly in the ranks as a promising new addition to the marketing team. She was well-liked by her colleagues, always smiling and ready to take on new challenges. But behind that bright facade, Maeve had been keeping a secret an affair with the company's charismatic and powerful CEO, Dorian Hayes. Dorian Hayes, a 45-year-old self-made millionaire, had built Apex from the ground up. Known for his ruthlessness in the boardroom and his charm with investors, he was a man who thrived on control. But his secret relationship with Maeve, which started innocently, would soon unravel his carefully constructed world and lead to deadly consequences. It was early on a Tuesday morning when the first signs of trouble emerged. Maeve Jensen had missed her usual check-in with her team, and her absence went unnoticed for the first few hours. The office was busy, and no one thought to question why she hadn't shown up. It wasn't unusual for interns to work late or come in a bit later, especially with the demanding schedule that came with working at a high-powered tech company. But by noon, Maeve's colleagues began to worry. Her desk was neat, her personal items untouched. The coffee cup she'd left behind was still sitting on the edge of her desk, its contents cold. It was unlike Maeve to leave things unfinished. As the hours passed, a sense of unease spread through the office. A call was placed to security to check the building's surveillance footage. What they found was chilling. Maeve's last known location was the CEO's office. She had entered the office the night before but had never been seen, leaving. The next step was inevitable. Security staff were dispatched to the CEO's private office on the top floor. The door was locked, but a spare key was used to gain entry. Inside, they were met with a scene that would haunt them forever. The lights were dimmed, casting long shadows across the spacious room. In the center of the floor lay Maeve's body, lifeless and cold. The scene was meticulously staged. Maeve had been positioned with one hand outstretched, as if reaching for something. There were no signs of forced entry, and everything appeared strangely calm, as though someone had carefully arranged the room to cover up the crime. Traces of struggle could be seen in the disheveled papers on the desk. Her death was not a random act of violence. It was personal. The police were called immediately, and within hours Detective Olivia Grant was on the case. She had seen her fair share of brutal crimes, but something about this one felt different. As she entered the CEO's office, the first thing she noticed was the cold, calculated nature of the crime scene. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This wasn't an accident. It was something far darker, and it had happened in a place where it least should have. As she began to examine the office, the sense of control and power that had once defined the space now seemed like a twisted facade. The walls, adorned with corporate accolades, now felt sinister. Detective Grant knew that someone with access to this high-security area, someone with power and influence, had committed this crime. The question was, who? Her focus turned to Dorian Hayes, the CEO. He had been the last person to see Maeve, and his connection to her wasn't just professional. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Maeve's relationship with Hayes had become more than just a rumor. Whispers in the office spoke of late-night meetings, private dinners, and a growing tension between the CEO and the young intern. But why would Hayes murder her? What had happened in those final hours? As Detective Grant began to piece together the timeline, she learned that Hayes had been in the office late the night before, alone with Maeve. He had left the building around 11:30 p.m., but had never reported to his security team about Maeve's absence. He had gone to great lengths to keep his relationship with Maeve hidden from the public eye, but his actions now raised questions no one could ignore. Meanwhile, Maeve's personal belongings, which had been left behind at her desk, provided another clue. A series of encrypted emails between Maeve and an anonymous source. It wasn't clear what they contained yet, but it was enough to suggest that Maeve had been involved in something deeper, something that could explain her death. Detective Grant knew one thing for certain: the investigation had only just begun, and the more she uncovered, the more the lines between professional ambition, personal betrayal, and cold-blooded murder began to blur. As the days passed, Detective Olivia Grant and her team worked tirelessly to uncover the truth behind Maeve Jensen's murder. What had seemed like a straightforward case of workplace violence was quickly turning into a complex puzzle that none of them could solve at first glance. The more they uncovered, the more the case seemed to twist and complicate. The first significant breakthrough came when the encrypted emails Maeve had been exchanging with an unknown sender were decrypted. They revealed a series of troubling messages that hinted at Maeve's increasing discomfort with her relationship with Dorian Hayes. In one of the last emails, Maeve had written, "I think this has gone too far. I can't keep doing this, and I don't think you realize what it's costing me." It was clear now that Maeve had been conflicted about her involvement with Hayes. But what had pushed her to end it? And why would someone want to silence her? The clues started to point toward a possible motive, but they were still far from the whole picture. The next critical piece of evidence came from the building's security footage. Although Maeve was last seen entering Hayes's office the night of her death, there was something odd about the footage. The timestamp on the surveillance cameras was inconsistent. After careful examination, it was discovered that the footage had been tampered with. The footage from the hours immediately preceding Maeve's arrival at the office had been deleted, leaving a glaring gap in the timeline. Detective Grant was certain now that whoever had committed the murder had also gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. The question was, who had the power and access to manipulate the security systems? And why did they want to erase the moments before Maeve entered the CEO's office? As the investigation continued, attention turned back to Dorian Hayes. He had been cooperative with the authorities, providing an alibi that initially seemed solid. He claimed he had left the office at 11:30 p.m. the night before Maeve's body was discovered. However, an unexpected lead emerged when forensic experts at the scene confirmed that Maeve's time of death was likely between midnight and 1 a.m., well after Hayes had supposedly left. This discrepancy led Detective Grant to revisit Hayes's movements. A deeper dive into his phone records revealed something even more troubling. On the night of Maeve's death, Hayes had made a series of frantic phone calls to an unknown number. The calls, which were made just hours before Maeve's death, had been traced to a burner phone registered under an alias. The discovery of the burner phone was a turning point in the investigation. Detective Grant knew that Hayes must have been hiding something. The burner phone was a clear indication that he was trying to keep something secret, something beyond just his affair with Maeve. But what? The investigation team worked swiftly. to track down the owner of the burner phone. Their breakthrough came when they discovered it had been used to contact an old business associate of Hayes, a man named Greg Arnold. Arnold had been a former investor in Hayes's company and was rumored to have had a falling out with him years prior. The two had been involved in a bitter dispute over a failed business venture, which had caused Arnold to lose a significant amount of money. Arnold was brought in for questioning, and it quickly became apparent that his anger toward Hayes had never fully dissipated. Arnold admitted to having a conversation with Hayes the night Maeve was killed, but he denied any involvement in the murder. Still, the phone records between Arnold and Hayes provided a chilling clue. In their conversation, Hayes had been heard mentioning taking care of it, a cryptic statement that seemed to indicate someone was about to be silenced. The investigation was now reaching its peak. Detective Grant could see the web of deceit, betrayal, and revenge tightening around Hayes, but she needed more. She needed concrete proof. The next key discovery came when forensic investigators examined Maeve's body in greater detail. A tiny scrap of fabric was found caught on her sleeve, a piece of clothing that didn't belong to Maeve. The fabric was analyzed and matched to a shirt that was known to be part of Hayes's personal wardrobe. It seemed that Hayes had been present at the scene long after he had allegedly left the office. At this point, Detective Grant was convinced that Hayes had been directly involved in the murder. But the deeper question still loomed. Why? What had prompted him to take such drastic measures to eliminate Maeve? The investigation turned toward uncovering any other motivations or hidden motives that Hayes might have had. Was it simply about power and control, or was there something more sinister behind the murder? As Grant worked through the evidence, she found that Hayes had been in desperate financial trouble. Apex Technologies, despite its outward success, had been struggling to stay afloat. Hayes had taken significant personal risks to keep the company running, and he had been relying on a major investment deal with an overseas company to secure his financial future. If the deal fell through, his company and his personal wealth would be lost. Could it be that Maeve had stumbled upon something she wasn't supposed to know? Was she a threat to Hayes's empire, perhaps threatening to expose his financial instability or unethical dealings? With this new information, Detective Grant was now closer than ever to understanding what had truly happened. The evidence against Dorian Hayes was mounting, and it seemed there was no escaping the conclusion that he had played a key role in the murder of Maeve Jensen. Just when Detective Olivia Grant thought she had a clear picture of the case, a new lead emerged that flipped everything on its head. For weeks, the investigation had focused on Dorian Hayes, the powerful CEO whose affair with Maeve Jensen seemed to be the center of the crime. But a small, seemingly insignificant detail would soon reveal that the story was much more complex than anyone had anticipated. The breakthrough came when a former employee of Apex Technologies, a man named Thomas Keller, reached out to the police. Keller had been fired from the company several months earlier under questionable circumstances. He had kept a low profile since his departure, but the mounting pressure of the investigation seemed to have triggered his conscience. Keller told Detective Grant that he had overheard several heated conversations between Hayes and a woman who, at the time, he did not know was Maeve. According to Keller, these conversations had taken place on the night of Maeve's death, long before she was found in Hayes's office. But there was something that struck Keller as odd. He recognized the woman's voice. In fact, he had heard it before, several times. It was Maeve Jensen's voice. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. If Maeve had been involved with Keller in some capacity, someone who had been disgruntled and fired from the company, then the case took on an entirely new dimension. Was Maeve in deeper than just an affair with Hayes? Had she been involved in something much more dangerous? Detective Grant dug deeper into Keller's history. It wasn't long before she uncovered something chilling. Thomas Keller had been connected to a financial scandal involving Hayes. Before he was fired, Keller had worked closely with Hayes on several high-profile projects. And during that time, Keller had witnessed things that would come to light much later in the investigation. Maeve Jensen, it turned out, had stumbled upon a massive financial cover-up at Apex Technologies. She had discovered discrepancies in the company's financial records, evidence of embezzlement that linked Hayes to illegal offshore accounts and questionable investments. Maeve had been investigating the financial activities of Apex, something no one knew she was doing. But as she dug deeper, she realized the extent of Hayes's financial trouble. His company was on the brink of collapse, and the public would soon learn of his fraudulent activities. In her final days, Maeve had been planning to confront Hayes with the information she had uncovered. She intended to expose his corrupt practices, but something stopped her. Detective Grant's team unearthed Maeve's personal bank records, which showed a large withdrawal made just days before her death. It wasn't a withdrawal from her salary. It was a transaction with none other than Thomas Keller. A transaction that suggested Maeve had been in contact with Keller in the days leading up to her death. As the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place, the situation became clearer. Keller had been involved in the embezzlement scheme and had been working with Hayes to cover it up. But as Maeve got closer to exposing the truth, her life became expendable. In a desperate bid to protect himself, Hayes enlisted Keller to silence Maeve before she could go public with the information. The most shocking part of the revelation was the discovery of the burner phone used by Hayes to contact Keller. Forensic analysis confirmed that Hayes had been using a burner phone to communicate with Keller the night Maeve was killed. The conversations between the two men had been brief, but they were chilling in their implications. Hayes had instructed Keller to take care of it, a coded message that seemed to confirm that Maeve's death had been planned long before it happened. But the twist didn't end there. A forensic review of Maeve's autopsy revealed a surprising detail. A small fragment of fabric was found under her fingernails. After extensive analysis, the fabric was identified as a piece of clothing from Hayes's personal wardrobe, his shirt. This piece of evidence was crucial. It meant that Hayes had been present at the scene of the crime much later than he had originally claimed. The timeline that Hayes had provided, of leaving the office at 11:30 p.m., was now in question. His alibi began to fall apart, and the evidence pointed directly to him. At the same time, investigators discovered that Maeve had been in possession of information far more damaging than anyone had realized. She had gathered evidence of the embezzlement and was planning to confront Hayes with it. However, in her final hours, Maeve had tried to protect herself by secretly transferring the documents to a secure location. She had also made arrangements with an anonymous source, someone she trusted to leak the information if anything were to happen to her. Detective Grant's team now understood why Maeve had been targeted. She had discovered a network of corruption that could have toppled Hayes and his company. But when she got too close to exposing the truth, Hayes acted swiftly to silence her. And he used Keller, the very man who had been complicit in the scheme, to do the dirty work. The final revelation came when Keller, realizing the full scope of his involvement, became a reluctant informant. He confessed that he had been the one to murder Maeve under Hayes's orders. Hayes had promised to clear Keller's name, but when Maeve found out about the corruption, Keller had been forced to make sure she never spoke about it again. He had followed through with the murder, believing it was the only way to protect himself and Hayes from ruin. Keller's confession sealed the case. What had seemed like an office affair gone wrong was, in fact, a calculated murder orchestrated to protect a multi-million-dollar empire built on lies, manipulation, and corruption. The legal battle that followed the revelations of Maeve Jensen's murder was one of the most high-profile and dramatic in recent years. The charges against Dorian Hayes, CEO of Apex Technologies, were serious: embezzlement, conspiracy, and the murder of Maeve Jensen. Once a revered business leader, Hayes was now facing the collapse of both his company and his future. The trial began with intense media attention, and the courtroom was packed with reporters eager to cover the fall of a corporate giant. Hayes's defense team worked hard to create doubt about his involvement in the crime. They claimed Maeve's death was an accident and that he had nothing to do with the murder, blaming the entire event on Thomas Keller, a former employee who had confessed to the crime. But the evidence against Hayes was undeniable. The prosecution presented encrypted emails revealing Maeve's investigation into Apex's finances, linking Hayes to a massive embezzlement scheme. Forensic evidence placed him at the crime scene much later than he had claimed, and phone records showed he had communicated with Keller in the hours leading up to Maeve's death. Keller, having confessed to carrying out the murder, became a key witness for the prosecution. He explained that Hayes had manipulated him into silencing Maeve, whose investigation posed a threat to their scheme. Keller's testimony confirmed that Hayes had orchestrated the murder, fearing exposure of his financial misdeeds. As the trial progressed, Hayes's defense began to unravel. The defense argued that Keller had acted out of his own malice and that Hayes had no knowledge of Maeve's death until after the fact. But Keller's confession and the mounting evidence against Hayes were too strong to dismiss. The jury deliberated for a short time before reaching a verdict. Hayes was found guilty on all charges, including first-degree murder. His life sentence in prison was a stark contrast to the powerful CEO he had once been. As for Keller, his cooperation with the prosecution earned him a reduced sentence of 25 years, though his life was effectively over. The case shattered Apex Technologies. The company's reputation was ruined, and investors pulled out in droves. Once the pride of the tech industry, Apex now stood as a cautionary tale about the dangers of corporate greed and manipulation. The conviction of Dorian Hayes and Thomas Keller brought a sense of justice to those who had been impacted by the tragic events surrounding Maeve Jensen's murder. But for the public, the aftermath left lingering questions. How far can ambition and power push someone? Can a corporate empire built on deception ever survive the truth coming to light? For Hayes, it was the end of his career. His empire crumbled, and his personal life shattered. For Keller, it was a different kind of defeat, one that saw him trapped by his own decisions. While both men paid the price for their actions, the consequences of their greed and betrayal stretched far beyond the courtroom. As Apex Technologies sank into financial ruin, the question remains: how many more companies, institutions, or individuals hide secrets like this, waiting for a moment of reckoning? The case serves as a chilling reminder that no one, no matter how powerful, is beyond the reach of the law. In the end, truth always has a way of finding its way to the surface, no matter how deeply it's buried. But what about Maeve, the intern whose curiosity and integrity led her to uncover the truth, but ultimately cost her life? Her story is a tragic reminder of the risks that come with seeking justice in a world filled with corruption. For viewers, the case prompts reflection on the lengths we go to for power and the consequences of betrayal. What would you do if you were faced with the choice Maeve made? To expose the truth at any cost? As always, stay vigilant, because you never know when the next hidden truth is about to be uncovered.